Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2, part 2 of the Caribbean Strategy session, where we continue chatting with the CEO and Technical Director of the CARICOM Private Sector Organization, Dr. Patrick Antoine. In the first part of this episode, Dr. Antoine told us about the CPSO and some of their primary objectives, the major one being the work that they are doing to support member states in the performance and alignment of the CARICOM single market and economy across the region, specifically as it relates to the free movement of goods, services, and people. In part 2 of this episode, we discussed some of the region's financial roadblocks, exchange rates, regional stock exchange, access to capital, and to the US dollar. Dr. Antoine explains what the CPSO is doing to help find solutions, and he also outlines some specific upscaling projects that they are supporting across the region. This episode ends with some advice that I think we should all start acting on very quickly. So, without much further ado, here's part 2 of our chat with Dr. Antoine. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy!
We're going to pass this to heads of government first before it's disseminated across the region. But the good news is that we now have quantitatively solid models and sound estimates of what this means for a region. That is the good news coming in your program this morning.
No, but let me ask you this, because and that is indeed good news, and I would look forward to whenever the documentation is released generally. But I'm curious because from the other standpoint, we face some other issues. One, there's an opportunity, I would argue, where we could be looking at nearshoring in some of the strategic locations. But at the same time, I counterbalance that with a little discussed notion thus far, which is known as trade deflection. Because obviously with all of what, for example, United States is doing with China, which is the world's second largest market, the reality of life is that those goods, give it some time, but 6 months, 9 months, they're going to find a way. Already we're hearing notions of people going to ship directly from China into the region. So our markets can also get flooded, frankly speaking, with some of those goods and below prices, and you end up with economic dumping, etc., pricing below the cost of production, etc. So, I'm looking at it that, yes, on the one side, we have some opportunities, but there are some additional difficulties that we also need to take into consideration.
So let me just thank you for that. And I don't think you understand, but you spin these things off, and you have spun them off over the years in a way that I think, because you have an intuitive feel of both sides, you are able to relate to. I agree with you completely. And at the last meeting I quoted, we had difficulties. And I can say this because quoted is not a lodge. It's not a lodge. And when we have discussions, my view is that more of the quoted discussions need to diffuse throughout the community, right? But we had a discussion in quoted where we raised the need for a trade defense mechanism in CARICOM. We raised that pointedly. We have in the CPSO put up paper before, and I think it needs a little agriculture around the edges. But we recognized that we were coming to a time when markets were becoming more contestable. This is before the US first policy. And I have to tell you that I was a little disappointed that the reception or receptiveness by the member states to the fact that we needed to do this now, rather than wait for there to be a problem and then try to engage it, didn't seem to be there at the time. Now the ministers of Trade and Economic Development will meet in June, and we plan to hammer this point again, that it is absolutely critical for us to begin and very quickly settle on what a trade defense mechanism would look like across the region. There is no point having our colleagues in Jamaica or Trinidad or Guyana or Barbados struggle under an industrial policy to start new businesses and expand, and then to have the same markets that they're targeting within the community. It may not even be their own markets, but markets within the community, right? Damaged because you have no product that can't any longer go into the US on an economically feasible basis, that now is looking for new markets. and is prepared to do so based on what we call marginal cost models. So we are deeply concerned about that in the private sector as well. It's an excellent point. But here's the other thing. We also need to engage the opportunities in the CSME, but it will only come under the shelter of trade defense mechanisms. There's no point asking a private sector firm to invest in a venture that will take 5 years to pay back capex, capital expenditure, right? Only to have in year 2 or 3, right, this influx of products that essentially denies him the market certainty that our trade regimes were intended to secure. So I think we have a lot of work to do at the policy level as well. And we need a number of the governments that are, I think, more outward looking, right, to assist the community in driving the consensus for that to happen. And that's why I want to just really acknowledge this. I didn't prompt you at all. You're absolutely correct. It's an issue. It is an issue, right?
Okay. Thanks again, folks. I don't like these discussions that just present more and more challenges to my small and medium-sized businesses, especially. So, Doc, I'm going to ask again.
Yes.
From where you are sitting, I mean, and you mentioned it earlier, 5 years from now, some of these businesses may not be in existence based on what is going to happen between the next 6 to 18 months. Is there anything that you would recommend and or the CPS is doing in terms of response to the challenges that these businesses are facing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what we're talking about here is us working with the member states to put the policy regime in place proper. So in the case of 25 by 25, actually identified hundreds of opportunities. And I do mean that by name, by title, by market. There's one firm in Jamaica that has taken the leap, and they have had a capacity and a competence, for instance, in sausages and chicken sausages, etc. They do it well. Very, very well. And we identified the opportunities for chicken sausages, which is about $78 million worth of CARICOM import. So it's nothing to sneeze at. And they've taken the decision that, look, they want to expand so that they can essentially get the market for the Caribbean chicken sausages. And that's the kind of work we do. And we like when firms take our work and they run with it and turn it into investment business opportunities for themselves. We have a number of other opportunities like that. One of them, which is begging, is pork production. Suriname has enough capacity to produce a substantial amount of the region's pork production. And if you bring Guyana into that play and St. Vincent into that play and Grenada, and the colleagues in Jamaica called and said, yes, they were doing the consultation because they're interested in the pork. Not necessarily the other part of it, which was the pigtails, but the pork. And the region has an opportunity there, but we continue to import subsidized, and I do mean subsidized pork from a number of other countries, including the United States. And with the tariff upheavals, the sort of pork digest and the international pork journals are now saying that Brazil, which is bordering Suriname and bordering Guyana, will now become the new hemispheric producer of pork. But we are in the epicenter of that, and we continue to sit and to kick the can down the road. That's another proposal that's before the community. So what are we doing? We're doing the work, and we're trying to work with the countries in building consensus. We have other opportunities as well that we've been working on, that we've provided the evidence that there's a market for this. And we're trying to help the countries build consensus quickly. So let me tell you that, and this is technical, but the region ought to know this. There's something which says that if you want to be able to get the protection of the community for a product that is not benefiting from the common external tariff, that's the tax coming in, just like the US. Everybody now knows about tariffs. The US's thing has made everybody conscious about tariffs. Then you can ask the community to raise it to a reasonable level, which allows the initiative to thrive, right?
Yeah.
But for that to happen, you have to show that you can provide 75% of regional demand. And what we've said is, why 75%? There was no scientific study done. Our colleagues agreed at 75 at the time, but perhaps it's not the appropriate switch now. Perhaps the switch might be 40, right? And we enter into other special mechanisms beyond 40 if the regional market is starved. But we need to start. And so the same micro producer you're talking about and the small producer, they can't wait until they get to 75% because they looked at us in Barbados and Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago in the consultations we were having, and they said, but look, you guys have this number 75, but how are you going to get there? How are we
Yeah.
going to reach the 75% to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Before we can get this protective regime. And so we have put a proposal saying, let us look at lowering the threshold and dividing it into two pieces. One is nationally. So how much can you meet of the national, the country in which you are registered, right?
Right.
How can you meet a lower threshold there and benefit from the protection to grow it there? And then you can meet another threshold at the regional level. Those are the things
Fantastic.
we're working on that we believe will give the greatest value, right, to our private sector in the community. But we also do other things. We're working on standards. When Joe Cox was there, and we identified 25 by 25, we then took the further leap of working with the CDB to establish trade protocols so that people could trade with the certainty, knowing that one country or another wouldn't impose arbitrary import requirements on you. So trading protocols, we are able to do that. We still engage with that work with the Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency. And of course, you know that the issue of labeling has become a new restriction globally. In fact, on Friday, there's going to be a symposium somewhere in CARICOM on the front of package labeling. And we've argued that while we are 100% in support of eliminating non-communicable diseases and its causal factors, that we must do so in a way that brings de minimis damage to CARICOM's productive capacity that we've been
Agreed.
talking about in this forum all morning. And if we allow
Fantastic.
one country to have one set of front of package labeling standards and another one, third one, or people listening may say, but it's not a standard. Okay, if we allow them to put it as part of the criteria for entry, or we allow them put this as a technical requirement, then we end up with the same difficulties, which is a lack of predictability in a CARICOM market where already the problem is scale. We don't produce enough to bring down the unit cost of production for many things, not for everything, but for many things. So we need to be able to join the markets up. That's what the single market means. And anything that balkanizes or puts a new restriction is something that the private sector finds difficult to deal with. And of course, the issue becomes, because we talked all morning about cost, if I have a regime that now brings additional cost to me at a time when my major markets that I export to have also become more costly, you're bottling me in and you're killing me with cost, but where's the upside? The upside is certainly not what Mr. Cox was talking about, Joe, when he says that we're going to have an influx. That's the downside. So unless we start putting this thing in a framework where we have a 360 view, not just a column view, right, of what this time that we're living in means to the private sector, and we address this thing holistically, we're going to be still facing some challenges. So what we're doing here is trying to identify these challenges as a CPSO and work with the member states to get rid of them so we can give the private sector room to grow and to thrive. And of course, what I said on capital is major, because the junior stock exchange in Jamaica is a major source of financing for a number of small and medium firms. But that doesn't exist in Trinidad and Tobago. They put the legislation in place. It doesn't work as well as the Jamaica legislation. And so the small enterprises are capital constrained. To speak nothing of St. Lucia, to speak nothing of Suriname, where you don't have those exchanges, the junior stock market exchanges, where you can raise capital, you have an issue. So for us, that issue I mentioned is really important because we see that as the next critical step for us in the community. Yes? So that's what we're doing. We're helping to drive the agenda, and then we've had to step into trying to make matches. So we have right now 2 firms that are saying we can bring the technology. One firm says I can bring the capital. If we can find good, solid partners to do projects that are bankable and where there is an off-take in country, we have sort of 3 pieces that we prepared to bring to the countries as a package, where we don't get into it as a CPSO. We do the introductions and leave that to let it run. And we have something going on in mushroom production, which again is not small. It's $5 million for this country, but it employs about, 100 young people. It's got this technology driven. And if we can replicate this in 1 or 2 things, then we start getting the dynamism that we want. So the CPSO is an enabler in that regard.
All right.
So how can businesses, sorry, Joe, one question.
Patrick before. How can businesses, especially the SMEs, Doc, better engage with the CPSO, those that have not done so already, to access some of these initiatives and support and intelligence that you all offer?
So one of the things that we just took the decision to do, because I think we also need to look at ourselves in the mirror from time to time, is to get a resource, and we have a resource now. He's been on for 2 weeks, will help us to deal with engagements with the micro and small enterprises. We were built as a shop that would do the analysis, the policy, and sort of the work to create a pathway. And a lot of this work we actually leading in. And I think our colleagues at the CARICOM Secretariat, everyone's now comfortable with the quality of work and the engagement. So we were built that way. Political shop to sit on top the chambers and the manufacturers associations, etc., because the idea was not to try to sort of supplant what they do, but was to augment it with additional firepower. I can still say that it's not yet used. It's not yet an illegal term in the region. Let me say capacity. But we're finding that there's a need for us to do more. And that needs brought us to this person. And that needs brought us to, in the work that we do, identifying some opportunities for small countries and small firms. So when we did the work on opportunities in CARICOM, the FAO applauded the work, but they told us that you need to do this work specifically for the small countries in the Eastern Caribbean, because they're not at Jamaica, they're not at Trinidad. A lot of them are not going to be able to see which of these opportunities are fit for purpose for them. And we've done that. But that led us into a recognition that we needed to be a lot more, we need to step into the gap, is the way to put it, in making sure that we have a resource that can take that work and package it in a way that we can give it to the chambers and the manufacturers associations, because they too have their own gaps because of resources.
Yeah.
So working with them, the idea is really not for us to go directly to individual firms, but where we have clusters of firms, to work through the chambers and the manufacturers associations in reaching them. But where there is a particular request, we are always open to hearing and to seeing how we use that individual request and build the critical mass that is required around it. So for instance, we had a concern with packaging that came from Trinidad. When we started looking at it, this concern existed in Belize, it existed in Jamaica, it existed in Barbados. The same packaging concern, but the entrepreneurs, your team, were operating in silos. They didn't know that my colleague in Belize had the same problem and my one. So what we do is that we form a critical mass where we can bring this as an issue which has a coalition behind it. So when we solve it, we're solving it as a problem for as many firms and countries in the region that we could. And that's, again, one of the things that we've been doing increasingly.
All right. And I suspect we'll run out of time shortly. But I wanted to raise this issue with you because, in all the matters of involving expansion and really realizing opportunities, for example, in the OECS versus some of the larger islands, let me just put it more than that, the larger islands, there is a simple structural fact that I don't think we have been addressing as a region enough, and that is the matter of the exchange rate. Now, Jamaica has, call it a free-floating exchange rate. Trinidad, at best, my friend Marla Dukaran said it's a fixed rate. I call it a managed float. For the rest of the islands, frankly speaking, they are fixed or pegged in most part. And even Guyana, with all its oil resources, that one is also is fixed, even though there's an issue in terms of sometimes getting the requisite supplies on a timely basis, etc. The question, therefore, is, with all of these fixed regimes and managed floats, and when I say managed, very small margin of movement, a lot of them are, frankly speaking, overvalued, and that creates its own challenges. But from our politics is local, but there is resistance for any kind of market adjustment. So you have the challenge now where Trinidadian businesses are routing their bills through Jamaica and some extent through Guyana because of the severe foreign exchange shortage that you have there. But politically, it might not be palatable to do it. Barbados has had a fixed regime for forever. Again, I'm not sure if whether or not there is the political will and that would be palatable for any kind of adjustment. How do we, with that sort of context, how do we really move forward and gain the market efficiencies that we are all seeking?
So I think big question, because one of the issues that comes to mind when we speak, and I'm linking it back to our work about the regional stock exchange, is this issue of foreign exchange rates and foreign exchange availability. Are we clear? Are we settled? It doesn't appear to me that the heads have the appetite to engage anything different than the status quo. But there are interesting solutions that do not require full participation of states. If we're talking about foreign exchange, not just for foreign exchange purposes, but foreign exchange as a facilitator of the movement of economic activity across our single space. And we're engaging some of those. We had the issue where we're having some discussions with the Afri-Exim Bank on the PAPs. It has not been as widely accepted even on the continent as ought to have been the case. And so I think our heads, though they have endorsed in principle trying to use it where essentially the central banks put up some level of reserves that will resources, a stock of resources that can enable trade, or where they agree to clear their accounts afterwards. It can work in two different ways. I'm not sure if we're going to see that enabled anytime soon. The truth is that I think one of the big problems that we have, and that's the problem Trinidad has, in addition to the fact that it has what you would want to call a dual system. Dual as opposed to parallel, because you have the official rate, but oftentimes you can't get allocations at the official rate, and there's another rate that people use and are able to get the allocations from time to time that they need. But
Well, I mean, Patrick, let us just put it on the table. You're looking at rates anywhere between 8 and 10. And if you're really desperate for it, I've heard stories of people going over 12 and upwards. So, I mean, and that's just a reality where, and the rate is what, 680, Denisha, or somewhere around that ballpark.
Yeah. So it is a problem, because if you have the same, I'm back on message with you and Denisha this morning, and I make this point in every regional forum I go to. If you have a chap whose margin is 10%, 12, right? 20. He makes 20% when he exports into another market, and he has to pay a 25%, right? Principal on top of that to get a foreign exchange allocation. You've just made him in the second round decide that it's better not to trade. And I think that is what we're seeing a lot of. But I was making the point that the region has to sit down in some configurations we don't like to do. The ministers of finance and the central bank governors have to sit and have some serious discussions about how, even if we don't want to move the whole hog, we're going to be trying to engage this problem that bedevils intra-regional trade and intra-regional investment. It's not just trade in goods, it's investment, where you have people who have ventures they want to invest in, and they're disappointed because they're seeing the opportunities. They're doing it in other CARICOM states well, but they just can't get the foreign exchange to engage the investment opportunity. It's a huge problem. So I've gone around the issue, and I think this is perhaps one of the thorniest issues for us, because I just don't get a sense that the political will is there. Many countries link the foreign exchange rate to national sovereignty and national pride, right? And we're going to have to do a really serious education exercise so that countries understand that in order to survive in a global environment where you need to be competitive, you have to give the policymakers the flexibility to do some of these things. So part of the work we did looked at Turkey. Turkey is becoming increasingly competitive. They have people, they have domestic currency, they have resources. What they don't have is a lot of the hard currency that they need to drive a lot of the opportunities that they want to engage internationally. And what they've done is that they've decided that they will engage in a series of currency devaluations over time. And those currency devaluations, I'm not promoting it, I'm simply saying it's a tool, has allowed them to garner a lot of international trade in certain sectors, including in CARICOM, where, for instance, were it not for the intervention of the court, they would have taken the entire CARICOM market for cement, right? But that gives the policymakers, that is how you can leverage policy And I'm not advocating that we do that. I'm simply saying that what this time requires is complete policy flexibility so we can use the best instruments, not just blunt ones, but the best ones, to drive our economic performance and long-term sustained development of our people. And many times, you are right, the overvaluation, particularly in a context where you're becoming higher and higher and higher cost, right? As you know, we're one of the highest cost tourism destination, beautiful like hell. No one can deny that, right? But there's an inflection point at which you trade off a little beauty, right, for a little best, sort of vacation package. And I think we've been managing with the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association these discussions, again, excellent partnerships, and with others, how we work with the countries to help to mitigate and to forestall some of these influences we've spoken about this morning, because there is a keen recognition that our tourism product is now becoming a lot more price sensitive. We're getting to that point where it's becoming a lot more price sensitive. Big discussion on the foreign exchange rate, but we've segued into production, tourism, small and micro enterprise trade, because this pulls it all together. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why we do it. That's why we do it. Not for itself, but that's why we do it, to enable these things.
But, and I suspect that's where we'll have to probably end it for this morning.
Yes,
it's always a pleasure
absolutely.
speaking with you, my friend. And, we definitely need to have a part 2 of this kind of conversation, because I think this is the kind of deliberation that we really have to engage in for us to move forward as a region. So with that, for Sir Patrick Antoine, CEO, Chief Technical Director of the CARICOM Private Sector Organization, for profound thanks to you this morning, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Yes, man. And on that score, I leave it to my co-host, Denisha, to take us home.
Yes.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I do want to thank Dr. Antoine again for your time this morning and your insight. I think it's extremely valuable. Sure, the businesses around the region will be, very happy to have this level of engagement from the CPSO. And in closing, I'd just like to ask you, Dr. Antoine, for one message that you would like to leave with businesses across the region, especially ahead of these challenging times?
So I know that my colleague Joseph Cox will smile at this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Buy regional, invest regional, enable regional, think regional. CARICOM can do it. We are a viable economic unit, but we have to understand our advantages, rest on moving faster than anyone else, and looking after our own commons, our own people. Buy regional,
Thank you.
work regional.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. And definitely it sounds like we will need to be having a part 2, because a lot of things that I wanted to discuss, we didn't have the time this morning. But thanks again, everyone. And thank you for our listeners and viewers. Everyone, please enjoy until our next episode. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.
All right. Cheers.